Hello and welcome to the Mind webinar on self-soothing for children and young people. My name is Rai Kawanoka and I have been counselling young people since 2010. I've worked mainly in educational settings, both private and non-profit. I initially trained in humanistic therapy and cognitive behavioural therapy. I've lectured on foundational and honours degree person-centred counselling courses. I'm relatively new to West Sussex and originally I'm from the States, so you might detect a little bit of an American accent at times. I'm a parent of two young people and I use pronouns she and her, and my aim today is to provide you with a brief introduction to self-soothing. I'm hoping to include tips and strategies that carers might find useful with young people in their lives. So, what do we mean by self-soothing? According to quite a lot of resources, self-soothing is generally what you can see here, a behavior or range of behaviors that a person uses to regulate emotional states by themselves, usually emotional distress. Self-soothing behaviors often develop in early stages of life, but are found all across the lifespan. So it's not uncommon for adolescents and even adults to continue engaging, relying on behaviors developed during childhood. Self-soothing behaviors are commonly seen in individuals who are diagnosed with anxiety, autism, depression, complex trauma, and many others. Examples of self-soothing. Well, if you have a look at the list that's here, you can see that we have two very different lists. Okay, on the one side, you have things like hugs and pets, bubble baths, whereas on the other side, you have things like picking or plucking, skin, nose, hair, biting, sucking. There are quite big differences between the two lists on here. And if we take a moment to consider those differences, might be able to work out what they are. In mental health field, we might refer to these as sort of adaptive behaviors on the left and maladaptive on the right. Being able to self-soothe is important for our emotional well-being. I mean, everyone needs to be able to switch off when alarm bells are ringing really loudly. It's all right to have some sort of go-to method to ease our stress, but some self-soothing behaviors are sort of considered more socially appropriate than others. Others are, considered damaging even. Now, this is the main difference between adaptive and maladaptive self-soothing strategies. Self-soothing strategies that create harm or those that aren't healthy tend to create quite a noticeable buzz, and they have a higher rate of kind of addictive quality to them. So they can be harder to get rid of, if you like, or to supplement or to replace. What we find often with maladaptive self-soothing strategies like those on the right-hand side of the screen is that there tends to be a bit of a cliff edge once the behavior is no longer being used. So there's a real sense of loss when that behavior isn't being employed, whereas more adaptive or more appropriate self-soothing behaviors tend not to be as powerful and not as noticeable when they're not being used. But in a way, that's why they're healthier. So let's explore today the ways that we can encourage adaptive self-soothing, why self-soothing is necessary for many people, and what we can do to transition away from maladaptive self-soothing strategies. So first and foremost, why self-soothe? Well, there's lots of reasons, and if you have a look here, um, people need to self-soothe for an endless list of reasons. This is by no means exhaustive. For young people with ineffective soothing strategies, they tend to be for reasons such as a transition, for example, maybe new siblings, relationship endings, a loss of any sort. That could be identity or death, perhaps a new home, new school. These sorts of changes can create a need for soothing. Any challenges, for example, bullying, exams, discrimination, poverty, even these sorts of issues can require a need for soothing. Trauma, either historical or current, trust issues, perhaps through attachment disorders or just difficulties in general with caregivers. There can also be sensory needs due to neurodivergence, such as autism, or perhaps because there's a tic disorder, which tends to surface around 6 or 7 or can be exacerbated later on in childhood. So what helps? Well, it might seem counterintuitive, but most people who know a lot about self-soothing would suggest that the first port of call is to ignore the behavior. Now, this does come with a few caveats. Okay, if you disengage, if you switch off from it, this is where we're talking about non-dangerous behavior. So I just need to get that out. Where the behavior is inappropriate or unsuitable in some way, unwanted, but not harmful, most very young children engage in this kind of behavior, and typically they grow out of it. For many caregivers, a watching, waiting, ignoring strategy really, really genuinely does work. And by giving oneself permission not to be concerned with some behaviors, at least for a short time when children are very young, it can reduce the stress not only felt by carers, but also the young people in their care. This in and of itself can lessen the need for soothing strategies. So simply being armed with a good understanding of soothing strategies and knowledge might mean that the self-soothing that's considered inappropriate or maladaptive sort of naturally shifts. It can be enough for many carers just to have that confidence to know that nature will kind of find a way for it to shift. But when that doesn't work, when there are ways to redirect when there's a wish to redirect the behavior, the right kind of support can lead to better coping strategies. So anything considered embarrassing or distressing can be shifted so long as this approach is paced well and approached gently. If carers attempt to redirect soothing behavior, particularly with very young children, it should be done without shame, without shaming of the individual. Any negative attention, such as punishment, can actually increase stress and mean that the child is more reliant or more in need of soothing, and therefore less likely to let that unwanted behavior go. So it really does have to be tread lightly when a carer is trying to help a young person shift from unhelpful to helpful self-soothing strategies. Now, what helps? Okay, well, if the behavior isn't shifting, but there aren't any dangerous aspects to the self-soothing, then here are some things that might help. Before I go any further, if the behavior is not just distressing, but also physically harmful, it's very, very important to seek immediate attention, not to wait, not to ignore, not to be just watchful and hope it goes away. Any dangerous behavior, any violent behavior does need assistance. Where the behavior isn't that level of dangerousness, the best place to start with is just simply observing. Okay, so once a carer has waited for it to shift and it hasn't, this has probably already happened. The carer probably has already been doing a fair amount of observing. But what we want to do is to encourage a kind of scientific state of mind, considering what are the triggers. If there's a suspected range of triggers, are some more triggering than others? If you remove a trigger, does it have much of an impact? To what extent are potential triggers significant or not? Is there a setting? Is there a person? Is there other environmental factors like sleep or food that have any kind of impact on the behavior? It could be really useful to keep a log here, and to just keep that going as long as possible to try and really detect any kind of noticeable patterns. If any third-party assistance is then sought, it's really useful for them to have that level of insight that a caregiver can provide if there's sort of a log or some kind of timeline. Always aim to approach any young person with understanding. Okay, reserving judgment is really, really crucial. Although it's naturally to feel judged, particularly if any of the unhelpful soothing behaviors are happening in public, trying to not then pass that judgment on to the young person can feel really challenging, but is really, really necessary if that shift away from the unhelpful behavior is going to happen more quickly. It will take longer if the young person feels shame or feels judgment. So how do we do that? Well, framing concerns as a choice, emphasize the young person's ability to make choices that are better for them, and to choose differently. Helping them to feel empowered is really important. Your belief in them is absolutely crucial to this. So, you can, if they're old enough, invite them to make suggestions themselves about what might be a better replacement behavior. And if they're not old enough to come up with ideas on their own, perhaps suggesting a range of different things they could try instead, and helping them to choose which one they'd like to try out first. If possible, and every family is different, every household is different, if you could potentially join in the suggested behavior, the alternative behavior, that could help as well. So if you're trying to replace with going for a jog or jumping on a trampoline, for example, if you have the capability to do this, then providing company for that young person while they're trying to replace the behavior can be really, really helpful, really useful, very motivating. And being present is very, very important. It involves really working hard to carve out specific time for the young person, which means stopping everything that you're doing during designated time to address the issue of replacing soothing behaviors. So not just happening on a whim or when it's convenient or when it's suitable, but really isolating specific regular times to address the self-soothing strategies. having said this, some people who are neurodiverse, if you set a meeting and you really spend a lot of time making a lot of eye contact and really kind of talking intensely about something that's as personal as this, it might not go down very well. So as the carer, you know your young person the best, and you'll know whether or not they might be more likely to engage in a conversation about this really personal behavior when they know there's only a short amount of time for the discussion to last, maybe in the car, en route to dropping off for an activity, so that they know this conversation can't go on and on and on, for example. Or maybe just having a chat where the gaze is focused on something other than the young person, so they don't feel kind of stared at and evaluated. It can take a while to work out the best way to talk with the young person in your life, particularly given that self-soothing issues can happen across the age range. There can be lots of different ways to engage the young person, but redirecting in a way that includes them as much as possible is really important. Young people really are sponges, and they absorb the behavior around them that they see, particularly the younger that they are, and we know this. This is why demonstrating effective self-soothing behaviors is really, really important. Good role modeling strategies, for example. When you as a carer are feeling overwhelmed, how are you dealing with this? It might not look identical to the way that the young person in your life is dealing with it, but is it a good example of a good self-soothing strategy? Is it something that you would be comfortable, happy with them emulating? It's worth really thinking about what the young person sees as your coping strategies and how much they can borrow from that. If you catch yourself, for example, biting your fingernails, a good strategy is to own it, not to try to cover it up, and then letting the young person know that you want to choose a better self-soothing strategy, that you're working on it. Everyone's a work in progress, and trying to be a good role model about demonstrating resilience, a willingness to change, a willingness to adapt, and an openness about not being perfect. That can be really, really powerful. When we talk about redirecting, which I've mentioned quite a bit already, redirection is a good way to offer support, provided it's done with warmth and non-judgment. Now, this might mean reminding a young person about alternative strategies. It might mean joining in with them, like I've suggested. It might be writing down a list of their worries and then letting them rip it up. Perhaps young children can benefit from symbolic play. Why is Teddy feeling sad today? What is Teddy going to do about being sad? How can Teddy help himself when he's feeling sad? As far as therapy is concerned, some people respond really well to DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. The young person in your life might benefit from a range of other activities to redirect towards, and we'll look at a list of potential redirecting behaviors in a moment. But ultimately, the really important thing to bear in mind is trying to stay as positive as possible, even when there's setbacks. Any small thing that goes well, trying to give room for praise alongside suggestions of how it can be done better or opportunities to learn. It's that noticing of even a willingness to change, even if making that change isn't happening, a willingness to be open about it and open to change. is worth praising and is worth supporting. Oh, okay. Now, sample activities that people might be interested in redirecting towards. On the screen that I've got here are two very different lists. Okay, on the left you've got activities or behaviors that we say decrease arousal. Okay, and on the right are ones that might increase arousal. Now, if you spend some time looking at them, you'll notice that there's some overlap. You have jumping, for example, on both sides of the screen. Okay, for one person, it might be that jumping actually lowers energy, whereas for another person, it brings the energy up. Working out what behavior to replace unwanted self-soothing behaviors with is unique to all individuals. Okay, it may take time to identify if an unwanted behavior is to do with being over or understimulated, or what exactly over or understimulates someone. It varies so much from person to person that it really can be about trying things out, getting things wrong, but being prepared to keep trying, almost like a scientist keeps trying to find out what works best. It could take a while to negotiate the right strategies, and it's likely to need adaptation over time as well. So a willingness to keep kind of coming back to it when things stop working. Now, just to let you know, these two lists are not exhaustive. It might be that we could continue adding to these lists indefinitely. For every person, there's something we could add. This one is just one that I've pulled from an NHS resource, I think Mother and Baby Unit in Bradford, a leaflet from August 2021. It just throws out a few different suggestions about things that might be useful for some people, adults or young people, when they are looking to shift away from unwanted soothing behaviors. So this really does conclude my presentation on self-soothing behaviors, and please be aware that if there are any harmful behaviors that are witnessed, a GP or professional crisis service should be engaged immediately, and that watchful waiting shouldn't be employed. Where it is employed, if a carer or parent is struggling, there are lots of professionals out there who can offer support and guidance about redirecting, role modeling, and supporting young people effectively. Thank you for listening, and good luck.